The US government is buying Bitcoin and they don't want you to know about it. Here's the proof. Last week, Bitcoin crashed to 60,000 and then it all of a sudden shot back up nearly $10,000, almost to 70,000. And you got to ask yourself, why? What happened? And that same day, Jim Cramer went on CNBC. Of course, everybody knows the inverse Cramer this, that, and the other. But something that is very unique is that he has the inside scoop to all of Wall Street. He had this slip up that said that the US is buying Bitcoin at 60,000. Now, if you don't believe me, we'll listen to that clip here in a second. But this is the same government that said that they were going to find budget neutral ways. So, what does Jim Cramer know that nobody else does? We're going to dive into all of this and see if it's actually realistic that the United States bought Bitcoin. But first, of course, let's listen in to what Jim Cramer had to say.
Do you think that the president is going to fill the Bitcoin reserve?
I don't know. That will
Well, that's
be
what I
a
heard at
big
60.
deal.
I heard at 60 he's going to fill the Bitcoin reserve. You better cover. This is the level.
Meantime, whether it's Bitcoin strategy, even Palantir, Jim, the notion of a Democratic House, and according to Axios this morning, maybe a Democratic Senate. What happens if policy starts becoming a headwind, not a tailwind?
Well,
So then Jim Cramer said it himself. Oh, the US government might be buying Bitcoin. There might be a worry of the policy here or there. But something that I think that he lined out, which was very unique, is that he's hearing that the US government is doing that, right? Because he said it on the market alert that Trump bought Bitcoin for $60,000. Yet there was no on-chain confirmation. Cramer doesn't just make stuff up like that on live TV, but without hearing something from somebody, though. And I think the timing here is very suspicious because Bitcoin hit 60,000 and then massive buy pressure appears out of nowhere and the price rips back up to 70K within a short period of time. So we're going to start to see how this will play out here very shortly. But I think it's unique that Cramer is hinting at this because there's been the executive order, right, that has said that the United States is going to be buying $60,000. Yet, Jim Cramer and Trump, nobody's announced it. Now, here's where I think that this all situation plays into the role of the United States government actually stacking Bitcoin. Well, Trump is a very smart man. He does have a big ego, like the many of us do, and he wants to be known as the Bitcoin president. Now, where I think this is different is that he also understands that this is a scarce resource. Now, Trump is a real estate guy. His children are all into the Bitcoin space, so he realizes that there's only 21 million. And that the United States needs to be fixing up as much of it as possible or scooping up as much as possible. Yet with that, right, we've also seen that the United States has not moved forward on the Bitcoin strategic reserve at all. There hasn't been an ounce of a purchase. Now, you might ask yourself why that is, and we're going to line all that out here in a second. But I think it's unique that Trump essentially ran on this, and now we haven't really seen much come from it. So diving into it a little bit further, there was this executive order that Trump established to get the U.S. strategic reserve, right? But they've been pushing for gold reserves and other things as well. The language was specific here. It said that the Bitcoin strategic reserve needed to be budget neutral. And most people who heard that and assumed that it meant that they won't buy. Well, it seems to be wrong here because it seems like they'll find creative ways to acquire Bitcoin without taxpayer spend. Now, Patrick Witt from the White House Digital Assets Council said that in January, they're working through, quote, obscure legal provisions. And that's the quiet part. So what are some of the budget neutral options? Well, they've already had the seized Bitcoin come in, right? But they can't have anything, I guess, further here, right? Because they're not going to deploy those taxpayer funds to now get the Bitcoin and make it, let's say, a little bit higher in price than what we were seeing before. Now, when we see how this is going to keep on playing out here, that's where I think it's going to get very interesting because we're starting to see how, I guess, the strategic reserve is playing out, but while we are watching this play out, we are seeing Trump and others really kind of take Bitcoin to the forefront, right? The other option that they've laid out is the gold revaluation. Now, is this actually feasible? This is where I think Bitcoiners are a little, I guess, I don't want to say ignorant, but maybe just a little bit on this subject, because let's face it, one of the biggest issues with gold is that it takes forever to revaluate, right? So if it takes forever to evaluate or to revalue and all of that, well, now how are we going to see, I guess, this gold, actually come to fruition? Because we talked about it. They were saying, let's audit Fort Knox. Let's do all these different things. It would take 18 months or longer to revalue all of that gold. And in that 18 months, gold's price will go anywhere. I mean, we've seen gold's price essentially go double in the past year. We've seen silver prices more than that in a year. So what's to say that if we start to count how much gold there is in the next 18 months or so, that the price of gold won't be absolutely bananas. So just the infeasibility of that is a big reason why they won't do that for gold. Now, taking it a step further, we're going to ask, right? What else with gold, right? Why are we starting to see how gold is now actually at the forefront as well? Because people are saying that this is, a little bit of an issue here with how gold is unstable, right? Because the dollar revaluation strategies and the exchange stabilization fund, these have been kind of pulled up as some sort of way to obtain more Bitcoin. But this bailout that people have been talking about is not essentially going to happen here at any time, because even though we've had Scott Bessent and the vice president coming out in the same week that Bitcoin crashes, they publicly defended Bitcoin as a, quote, very important asset. Scott Bessent even specifically said that the seized $1 billion worth of Bitcoin, retained 500 million of it, is now worth over $15 billion, and they're keeping it all. He also said that they won't bail out Bitcoin, meaning that they're not going to be propping up the price. But obviously, that's a little bit different than just accumulating. But think about what he's really saying. We're not saving you, but we're also never selling ours. That's a hodler mentality from the United States Treasury. And that's where I think this news becomes even more bullish. So, I mean, I think it is going to, so I think it is going to completely keep it going. And why the VP and the Treasury Secretary come out in the same week and defend Bitcoin, unless they're positioning for everything, right? They're doing this all at very unique timing. All while Bitcoin's price is crashing. Everybody in the news is coming out and saying, oh, Bitcoin's price is absolutely just falling down, falling from a cliff. Yet we have the VP and the Treasury Secretary coming out and saying that they're very pro-Bitcoin. And on top of it, we have Jim Cramer coming out and saying that the United States might have been secretly stacking at 60,000. Now, that's where I think it's just half the story. We're going to keep diving into all of this, but make sure you guys are smoking that like Cheech and Chong, because now we realize something too, right? Even though there's not going to be any bailouts, and we've had Senator Cynthia Lummis talking about the Bitcoin, the Treasury and Bitcoin tax guidance, she's been looking at hinting of potential exemptions for all of this. Now, if we get rid of capital gains tax, which has come up and made waves for many here about the Bitcoin space, if we could go and buy something like a cup of coffee or something along those lines for Bitcoin, why would we be dinged capital gains tax, right? So I think the transactional value of this is something that Senator Cynthia Lummis has seen and has moved towards for a while. Now, I don't think we're anywhere relatively close to having Bitcoin as a transaction or peer-to-peer cash, at least in the United States, right? I mean, I think we're still a few years away from that, but the fact is moving capital gains tax away from Bitcoin, at least right now, would be a step in the right direction. And that's how, we can start to get towards there. Now, keeping it and taking it a step further, right? What else have we seen? We've seen that Eric Balchunas has said that, hey, These institutions, they aren't selling, folks. They aren't getting out of here. Eric Balchunas from Bloomberg said only about 6% of IBIT's capital left during the entire crash. Only 6%, right? So that's absolutely huge, seeing that when we saw multiple ETF outflows, that Bitcoin slid to 64,000 and it saw $272 million worth of outflows. That's only 6% of the entire holding. 94% of all BlackRock ETF holders were holding through that 40% drawdown. Sailors, Michael's strategy, of course, they held, and they in fact bought even more. Now, the craziest thing of all of this is that MicroStrategy had its third biggest buy ever, right? So he even came out and said that Bitcoin would need to hit $8,000 before they have any sort of balance sheet issues. That's where I think it gets even crazier, because we've had people screaming from the rooftops that, strategy is going to fall and all of these different things for quite some time. Yet we're starting to see some balance sheet concerns, and they've gotten cash on the balance sheet. They've done all these things to avoid any of those potential downfalls from the headwinds, right? So if institutions are hodling and buying, and the government is holding and possibly buying, who is selling? The answer here is retail. Retail is becoming that exit liquidity, and they're becoming that exit liquidity again and again and again. But I don't want you guys, the Green Candle listeners, to be becoming that exit liquidity. This is why I've partnered with Salt Lending. You could go to saltlending.com/green-candle today. And if you do that, you don't have to become the exit liquidity, because they're going to give you guys an exclusive rate for Green Candle listeners. They've told me potentially up to 50 basis points off if you go to saltlending.com/green-candle. So be sure to go there, or the link in the description, because this is where, legends are made, folks. Because at the end of the day, when we look at how Bitcoin and traditional wealth really plays out, this is where it gets unique. This is where things are very, let's say, wishy-washy at the end of the day, right? Now, when we keep going through this US bailout, right, and Senator Lummis, the taxes and everything else, right, the biggest kicker that we haven't seen a huge movement from is still the Bitcoin Strategic Reserve, right? Because this is where the supply shock starts to line out, right? Because Bitcoin is being absorbed at every level. Governments are hodling through seized Bitcoin and acquiring more. Institutions, 94% of them held BlackRock's Bitcoin ETF. Look, I'm not a proponent for the ETF or anything like that, but the reality is that retail is starting to become the exit liquidity for these big players. And this is where it is a huge problem, because there's the only one scarce asset like Bitcoin in the entire world, right? I mean, you can make the argument for gold, but how much gold is there really, right? Humans have never been able to comprehend something as scarce as Bitcoin. So this is why the meme of HODL has become such an acronym, right? Because at the end of the day, with this strategic reserve, with these institutions hodling Bitcoin and buying more, at the end of the day, the exit liquidity keeps becoming the exit liquidity keeps becoming retail, right? I mean, we're seeing more Bitcoin miners start to hold Bitcoin, right? We're seeing MicroStrategy, MSTR, really get up and look at that. And I mean, people are tracking these MNABs, right? If you look at this, you could essentially get to 1-to-1 value with strategy right now based on their stock price. 21 Capital's beneath MNAB. I mean, if you look at all these top players, right? I mean, Trump and his media company are the 12th largest holder of Bitcoin. We have, whoa, I guess I clicked on that. I didn't know you could go there now. That's crazy. But Strive, which is just a derivative of MSTR. Well, Strive is something that, just recently got purchased up, and they're the 11th largest holder. So we have the first and the 11th largest holder under one, essentially, umbrella at the end of the day. So Saylor keeps getting farther and farther ahead. He's not selling. He's convincing all of these governments, and he's convincing more and more treasury companies to come in and hold Bitcoin. And at the end of the day, the exit liquidity continues to be retail. Now, when we keep diving into how this is going to play out in the long run, I think this is where I love to show you guys the Bitcoin on exchanges, because this is where we start to see, the math of the supply shock really play out. Because this supply shock, right? I mean, even with Bitcoin crashing as low as it has, if you zoom in a little bit more here, we're seeing Bitcoin come off exchanges. We have less than 2.5 million. Okay, sure. Less than 2.5 million Bitcoin on exchanges. And when this dip came, a little bit came online, sure. And then it bottomed out. And then people immediately started taking Bitcoin off exchanges. And that's going to continue, right? Because at some point, retail panic selling will go all into buying. The sellers will run out and get tired. And when they do, that's when the supply shock happens. I mean, we literally saw silver move 41% in a single day on way less buying pressure than Bitcoin is seeing. And the crazy part is that if you look at silver moving 40% in the day, it's the third largest asset in the world. Bitcoin, of course, has fallen, but look at the differences in the market cap here. Bitcoin's a $1.3 trillion asset, while silver is literally more than 3 times that, nearly 4 times as big, maybe 3.5, let's say. So an asset that's 3.5 times bigger than the 13th largest asset in the world in Bitcoin can move 40% in a day. And you're telling me that you don't think that this is the case for Bitcoin? I mean, get out of here, folks. Because if silver can triple, what happens to Bitcoin when the liquidity tap turns on? Warsh is coming in at the Fed chair and he's going to cut rates, right? He wouldn't have gotten a job without promising to lower rates. Banks are leveraging ratios are increasing and they're mandatory by April 1st. And there's a $10 trillion in debt that's going to be refinanced. That's going to be coming. And Scott Bessent literally said that we want Wall Street and Main Street to do well. So that means that they're going to be injecting a lot of liquidity. Lend, baby, lend. That's what's coming, right? The banks are getting into Bitcoin. People are starting to wake up. And it's just a matter of time before we start to see that liquidity start to pour into Bitcoin. And that's where I think it's going to get very interesting. And the supply shock then isn't something that is going to be, let's say, just a talking head point on YouTube. No. I think that this is actually going to come true and we'll start to see it. I mean, take it from my friend Luke Mikic, who likes to argue about the power law ad nauseum here on Twitter. But I mean, we look at these models and we see Bitcoin fell out of the lower band, right? It fell below that power law and traded 40% below the channel. And it was supposed to spend 99% of the time, right? Above that. So models are broken from the downside to the upside all of the time. And at the end of the day, these models, right, are coming that way. Exactly. I don't trust guys like Luke Mikic either. But yes, Jim Cramer is the financial weatherman, right? He can be right and mostly wrong. But I think the one thing about Jim Cramer that, obviously the inverse Cramer is like a meme at this point, right? I mean, I'm not trying to deny that. But what I do think is that he has a lot of connections in that space. So I think that when he says things like he said here, right, where he said the U.S. government bought, I don't think that that is like necessarily out of bounds. I don't think that, I think that comes from somewhere, right? Because that comes from somewhere. I think that at the end of the day, Bitcoin, it's the liquidity is coming from retail because everybody is seeing stuff like this, right? They're seeing Cramer come in and get bullish, right? And so we're seeing, hey, Bill Miller come out and say that there's a reasonable chance we saw the bottom already last week. I mean, at the end of the day, when we keep listening to all of these Wall Street guys come in, I think it's just a matter of time. We see Senator Lummis not too long ago saying that she wants the U.S. to dump gold and buy Bitcoin. Look, the only thing that they aren't going to do is, potentially revalue that gold. I think that's where, it gets a little hairy. But I think that, the U.S. is going to accumulate Bitcoin. It's just a matter of time. They're just trying to figure out ways to do it, because Trump wouldn't have secured this Bitcoin strategic reserve if that wasn't the case, right? Paris is right here, saying you better have at least 0.001 Bitcoin before 2026. And, I always like to see and show you guys this bit info charts here, because we realize we're so early when we look at this chart, because if Paris were to tell you, hey, get in between here, right? 24% of wallets have between 0.001 and 0.0001 Bitcoin. That's literally, I don't know, like $600 now. So, at the end of the day, 10 million wallets have $1,000 worth of Bitcoin or more. For reference, there's 63 million millionaires in the world, folks. And there's just going to be more. That's increasing on a daily basis. Now, the crazy thing about all of this is that, these are wallets. These are showing cold storage wallets. You guys need to get your Bitcoin off exchanges. You want to help get that supply shock? You want to pump your own bags? The best thing you could do is get your Bitcoin off an exchange. They're giving an exclusive offer here, Treasury, for Valentine's Day. Show your Bitcoin a little bit of love by getting it off an exchange. And the easiest place to do that, I think, is Treasury. Now, like I said, they're doing something even better for you right now by giving you a deal for Valentine's Day. Now, you can get yourself a Treasury Safe 7, which I use. You could do that, and you can get yourself a free bonus wireless charger. A Safe 5 and a Safe 3 is 10% off. And they're giving you some bundles where you could get up to 20% off. All you got to do is go to the link in the description and get off zero, as my man McLovin is saying, because these guys are seeing exactly what we're seeing, right? These, people are starting to see that the amount of Bitcoin on exchanges is coming down. It's coming down at an all-time rate. And because that keeps coming down, it's yelling timber, folks. And because it's yelling timber, we're going to start to see just how quickly people's thesis change, right? I mean, everybody got shaken out here. And we've seen that there's the potential of the forced sale, right? People have been saying, oh, Bitcoin this, Bitcoin that, right? But at the end of the day, when we keep looking at how Bitcoin is developing, I mean, I don't know how you can't get more bullish than this, right? With the amount of Bitcoin coming off exchanges, the amount of buying pressure going on, just don't become the exit liquidity, folks. Because sure, the U.S. Treasury, they're not going to deploy taxpayer funds to bail out Bitcoin. Sure. If it was easy to get rich, everybody would be doing it, right? Trump said he's going to buy Bitcoin, right? Because he's mining Bitcoin. Buy Bitcoin instead of buying things you really don't need. Your future self will thank you. Just stay humble and stack sats, folks. It's coming. I promise. If you guys are all here, make sure you're subscribed. I've got a great interview dropping tomorrow morning, so be on the lookout for that. And I've got 2 more in the queue for you. So be sure to be subscribed to the Green Candle channel, and I'll catch you guys all at the next one.